I'm Ronald Stevens, Assistant Professor of Anthropology and Geography and African American and African Studies. Today is September the 6th, 2002 at approximately 10:50 a.m. And I'm here today to chat with Lieutenant Colonel Charles A. Lanes, Jr., who is one of the 3 Tuskegee Airmen in the state of Nebraska. Mr. Lane, tell me something. In what state were you born? In what state were you born, and why don't you share some of your experiences growing up in that state?
Well, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I attended, I remember my grade school, Sumner High School, Sumner High School, Stowe Teachers College, which is now Harris Teachers College. I stayed in a place called LaVille. Back in those days, each community had its own identification, like Sugar Hill, LaVille, Germantown, places like that. I went to, Stowe Teachers College I was attending when the war broke out, at least for me. It interrupted my studies, and that's when I joined the service. And one of the things based upon, we had a good school system in St. Louis. In fact, I considered it an outstanding school system. Of course, it was all black, but at the same time, we had an enormous number of black leaders who imparted to the kids, and including myself, what was necessary to survive. And at those times, and as my sisters call me, you're a depression baby. So I recognize what it is to growth and things of those nature.
The city of St. Louis has a very rich history. A lot of jazz came out of that city. Do you remember hearing any of the artists or about the artists visiting the town?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, my papa was a sideman. He played cornet and trumpet. In fact, he sat in with Fats Waller. Whenever Fats Waller would pass through town, my papa would, in fact, I, being the oldest boy, I would pedal from my home to wherever Daddy was playing, bringing his dicky front, his black jacket, and his cornet or trumpet, whatever he's playing that night. So, in fact, 2 or 3 times I sat in behind the piano where Fats Waller was playing, listen to the music. Yes, I do remember the jazz, yeah.
What was that like? I mean, in other ways for you, to be around very popular entertainers?
I wanted to be a musician initially, naturally, because that gives me the expanse and the energy, energies. And song did a lot to my mother. She sang, and she also played piano. My daddy played, as I said earlier, cornet or trumpet, based upon his lips, whatever his lips was working that day. And I wanted to. But other things came to mind. I was a youngster. Football was one of the things I wanted to excel at. I did excel at playing baseball and softball. As a matter of fact, I played ball till I was 38 years old. At least I played softball and baseball. And those things changed. In fact, I had a number of good coaches. 2 of my coaches came from black colleges. One named Lane College, not mine, named after me, but I recognize that. And what is this? Louisiana school, oh geez. Well, the Yellow Jack, I can't think right now, man. Okay. The senior citizen pauses, floating. But those are the things that impacted me. We had a drum and bugle corps, which all the kids in my neighborhood tried to become part of. In other words, there were always some goals that we wanted to, and our parents kept these goals in front of us, although we didn't have a lot of money, but those things kept us together, so to speak.
Right.
And the churches were strong in our neighborhood, definitely strong. And the leadership, black leadership was strong. The educators were strong. These are the things that I remember, and of course we're talking, I'm 77, so we're talking 70 years ago, 65 years ago, compared to now. And I have grandkids that I wish that I could tell them what it was and have them understand what it was all about. Right. And how I'm jealous of them, the opportunities that they have now that I didn't have when I was a kid.
Right. Well, what about the neighborhoods? I mean, what was it like living in a community then?
Well, back in my neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. For instance, I was the oldest boy of a large family. I wasn't the oldest. I had older sisters. But my mother could direct any kid on the block, could tell him what to do and when to do it and what not to do. So did any other mother on that block. In other words, if Otto Rothschild's mother saw me doing something wrong, she says, I'm gonna whip your you-know-what, and she wouldn't get away with it, you know. Mm-hmm. You can't do that nowadays, you know. Right. But that's the type of neighborhood control, community control.
Very good.
Parental leadership.
Excellent. Which is what I was hoping to hear and what I suspected life was like for you then. What were some of the other factors in your childhood that eventually influenced you to join the military and to excel?
Well, back in those days, they had a thing called the draft, okay? Number two, my grandfather was a member of the Buffalo Soldier on my mother's side. In fact, he soldiered right out here at Fort Robertson. And my father ended up being an Army cook in his early life. So when December 7th, 1941 showed up, the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor, there was no question in the Lane family what the Lane males were going to do. You know, I had a grandfather who was military, and my father spent some time. So that was one of the first things you had to consider, okay? Number two, I built model airplanes when I was started about 8 years old. I made them out of paper. I mean, you know, then the old bamboo, and then the balsa and Japanese tissue and gum and all that good stuff. And then when I got into high school, we had a club. And it was primarily a model airplane club, but we talked about aviation, aerodynamics, power, lift, drag, and all those things. And I became thinking, if I could build them, I should damn sure could fly them if I, you know, had a chance. Of course, then World War II, and then the 99 showed up. And from there, the story gets bigger, okay? In other words, I prepared myself, and I wanted to learn how to fly. We were a member of the bicycle club, and we used to, on Sunday mornings, we'd take morning trips. One of the trips from St. Louis was out to Lambert Field, which is right outside of St. Louis. And that was about a 26-mile ride, which was pretty good for a Sunday morning. And we'd go out there and watch the airplanes, and we got, you know, kids think, the imagination. I said, hey, I'm gonna go over and ask this guy to get a ride. Well, he told me what it cost. I couldn't afford no ride. But after about 6 trips out there, I convinced him if I did some work on his airplane, like wash his wheels, his windows or something, I'd get a ride. He did. He gave me a ride in this raggedy 3-engine Ford tri-motor, and had wicker seats, and no air conditioning, and the windows smoky, and I rode and it vibrated all around St. Louis for about 20 minutes, and I sat there, and he let me sit up front. I didn't do anything. I put my hands on the wheel, that's once, and that was it. Once I got a chance to ride in the airplane as a pilot, you know, in the pilot seat, that was it.
Right. And
then when Lenny got transfers later, when we had a guy from St. Louis by the name of Wendell Pruitt. He and a guy by the name of Allison, flying P-47s in the 332nd Fighter Group, sank a German destroyer in Trieste Bay, which is unheard of, that two fighter jocks strafing this destroyer, German destroyer, caused some explosions of weapons and powder on the deck, which went in the hole, which fell into some other ammunition and exploded and sank the daggone thing right there in Trieste Harbor. Well, the Air Corps at that time awarded Allison and Pruitt what they call a bond drive trip. In other words, back to the States as a hero. And he was passing through St. Louis at the time, being his hometown, and he gave a presentation at Stowe Teachers College about the Tuskegee Airmen and what he did. Well, that was all it took for me. There was 8 of us that were interested in flying. We corralled him, and he told us how to apply, what the answers were on most of the area's questions, and when to do it. And I went ahead and did it. And of the 12 people that took the exam, 8 of us passed. And then the rest is military. That's how I got into the military.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So that was in 1943.
43,
that you,
42, 43.
42, 43. That
I
you
finished high
enlisted.
school in 42, December 42, and started college in January of 43.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I turned 18 in June the 2nd of 1943, and the 15th of July I was in the service.
What was the first transition like for you in 43 when you became a cadet at the Tuskegee Institute?
Mm-hmm.
When you relocated from St. Louis to Tuskegee,
Mm-hmm.
what was that
Well,
first transition like?
Let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
I was really brought into the service in Jefferson Barracks and right outside of St. Louis. That's where I took what we call basic training. That was a heck of a transition from a civilian to the military, believe it. And then later we were shipped down to Keesler Field, Mississippi. That's when life changed completely. In fact, we were able to ride in a train in most locations, in the train, most cars, until we got down to Chattanooga. And then all of a sudden we found out that we no longer could sit in the cars that we were in, and we had to go to the segregated car, which were the first 2 cars behind the engine. Now, that's the first thing. Getting down to Keesler was another story. That's finding what military life was really all about in a segregated basis. And we were isolated. We were placed in a separate area of the base. We could only train in a certain area of the base. We could only eat in a certain area of the base. And we couldn't go to town. And you didn't want to go to town based upon the stories we heard. And I was just 18, so, you know, first time away from Mama. She let me know she expected this young boy to be straight and correct.
Right.
And of course, we went down there. Now, we went down and we had 137 of us applying for the program, initially down at Keesler. After testing and examination, 78 of us left Keesler heading to Tuskegee as pre-cadets. Now, 78 of us went into the program, and our class graduated. We ended at Tuskegee in October 1943, and we finished flying in August, 26th of August, 1944. We got commissioned and appointed on the 8th of September, 1944. Now, those training days between October 43 and September 44 was hard. We ended up with 34 cadets finishing out of 78. 28 of us were fighter jocks, and 18 of us ended up overseas as fighter jocks. Now, the transition, the mental process, I really can't, I tell you what, it was fast, it was furious, it was challenging. There were a lot of defeats. A lot of your buddies, you see them wash out, you didn't, you know, you knew they could fly, but they're meeting the standards, and the standards were, it was the same requirements as the whites, but they were elevated from time to time. And also there was a quota system. Thanks to Congressman, a senator by the name of Bill Bowe from Mississippi, he wanted to shut down the program, not being able to do that because General Davis took steps, and President Truman, as a senator, took steps to continue our program once we were challenged. It was instituted by Mr. Bill Bowe that we had a ratio. We had a ratio, and there was a limit. There was a quota, and it was based upon the population ratio in 1940 census, which was 7% of the population was black. Therefore, our class could not be more than 7% in ratio to the class that finished at Maxwell Air Force Base. So we had 3 guys in my class who didn't make it, and we've been flying with them for 9 months. I knew they could fly, but we figured based upon the rate, on this ratio that was established, they were washed out.
I want to step back just for a second, just
Okay.
so that the public, the people who will come behind and hear this interview, see this interview, that they'll have a sense of what the training was like.
Oh.
Could you give us a sense of the some details about what was were your daily assignments?
Okay. First, we had what we call pre-flight. Now, that was to determine whether or not you could qualify for as being a cadet, and it was to elevate you to the level of 2 years college. Basically, that was a basic training. In 3 months, we got what we call 3 months. We got 2 years of college, and most of us finished. Okay, that was when they reduced the 78 guys. We lost 12 guys out of that, or about 12. I'm getting to this age. Things are passing me by. You know?
I understand.
Yeah, and we took that. Now, in this cadet, call it CDD, Cadet Training Detachment, we flew. We were introduced to the early airplanes, the Piper J3 and the Ronca C3. These are the two airplanes we flew, and we got 10 hours in each one of those. At least I did. And you did everything. You were allowed to take off and land. In fact, I enjoyed that part of it. And once you finish that, you were certified to become a cadet. Then you're going into what they call pre-flight. Well, this is to check your military bearing. And it was hard. And you were lower class and you considered dummies. So you were dummies until you got to advance. And then from the pre-flight, you went into primary, which we flew. A lot of them flew PT-17s. We didn't. I flew the PT-19. The PT-17 was a bi-wing airplane. The 19 was a low-wing monoplane. And I enjoyed the airplane. As a matter of fact, I got so good in my mind, I knew I was the hottest thing in the class, which was almost got me socked. As a matter of fact, we had a thing that we were allocated 50 minutes of flying when you went out solo, okay? And they had 5 minutes to get the airplane down. So in other words, 55 minutes you should be parking your bird, shutting your switch off. For every minute beyond that 55 minutes, you had to do 10 push-ups, you know. This is part of the code, okay? So I had endured a number of push-ups. My instructor kind of laughed at me. He says, "Let me show you something." Well, what he did, when we finished your air work, you ended up about 5,500 feet, okay? So in other words, you had to rush like mad to get in pattern and so forth and so on to make sure. And he said, "Let me show you something." He took me up about 5,500 feet, brought the airplane, stalled, and spun it all the way down to the traffic pattern. Just spun it. Right. And then he got right into the traffic pattern and made a turn the base, turn the final. He didn't touch the throttle till he got to the end of the runway. Well, that blew my mind. Well, I went up and I practiced that. You know, I went up and I just pop it and spin it all the way down and slide right into the pattern, going and landing. We had what we call a 20-yard check, a 40-yard check, and a 60-yard check. Well, I was coming up to my 40-yard check. So I'd done my work and I was pleased. Chief Anderson, who we revere as one of our leaders, was my check pilot. And I'd done a beautiful job, at least in my mind, of flying for him. So I was smiling. He says, "Okay, take us home." Well, the first thing I did, of course, was pull that mother up, pop her over, and did a spin right down and got into the traffic pattern. I was feeling real good, you know. Oh, man, I'm great, you know. He handed me a pink slip. He said, "I didn't ask you for that." So I had to take 5 additional hours of instructor to correct what he thought was unnecessary. He said it was good, but I didn't ask for it. I almost got washed out. Then I got into basic when we flew. In primary, they teach you how to fly. In basic, they teach you the military way of flying, and that's a heavy airplane, radial engine. You're introduced into some instruments, and some instrument flying, weather flying, and we call it BT-13. It was a Volti vibrator. The thing we call it the elevator because it climbs so great. Well, I had a little problem there. Doing pretty good, I thought. In my mind, I knew that I wasn't getting washed out. And one check ride I had, one of these guys, the instructor I had never seen before, he came up and he was having me practice forced landings. In other words, in case you lose your engine, where you can put it down. Well, after I did it, and there's a certain procedure you follow. You got to find the wind. You got to make sure that the topography is level. You won't run into any structures or anything like that. You clear, power lines, and you don't run into plowed field, because if you do, you're going to tip the bird over. And stay away from the farmer's corn. Otherwise, the Air Force had to pay for it. So you got all that in your mind. Well, I'd done about 2 of them. This guy, after I did some more air work, he said, let's go back to Force Landing. Well, after about 7, I said, this guy's messing with me. He's doing something to me I don't like. Well, I was getting kind of angry, and I'm 18. I'm ready for glory. And all of a sudden, I told him, he says, do it one more time. And I got angry at him. I said, I've done it 7 times. What do you expect me to do? And he says, I want you to fly like me. I said, hell, I can fly better than you. Wrong words, man, wrong words. Attitude, mouth, it gets you in trouble again. Well, for that, I washed all the restrooms, mirrors, and commodes on the flight line for 2 months. That cleaned me up. I said I was never going to do anything. When I got to advance, I didn't have any attitude. When I got to P-40s, I didn't have any attitude. I cleaned my act up. So that's what it was like flying. I enjoyed the airplanes.
Very good.
And because I was restricted to the base, I didn't get a chance to go in to visit with the young ladies. So I had to spend a lot of time occupying my mind and studying. That helped me finish, believe it or not. I didn't have the competition of the young ladies down, which was nice.
So in a sense, the fact that there was segregation, that you all were segregated away from, I see the white officers, the privileges that they would have, or the surrounding community, etc. That in a sense that was a plus, because it allowed you to be more disciplined.
Oh yeah, we were definitely disciplined. And because you were a lower classman, and there was always the upperclassmen who were staying on top of you, creating you. In fact, I recall being forced to walk duck walk. You know what a duck walk is?
No, I don't.
It's a squat. You sit down and you grab your ankles, and you walk with holding your ankles. That's called duck walk. That's supposed to give you such guts and all that. And I also was used by upperclassmen as punishment. I had a guy by the name of Henry Peoples, who was from St. Louis. He didn't like me. Primarily, he and my sister were in the same class, older sister, same class. And apparently she rejected him, and he took it out on me. So he made me follow him all over campus, duck walking. Now, the upperclassmen could do that then. They can't do that nowadays. That's called harassment now.
Things have changed.
But back to, I was a cadet, and I lived in the barracks. I didn't live in the quarters. There were segregated quarters on base. And a lot of the instructors lived in town. They did not live. And okay, let's back up to the instructors. We had black instructors in primary, and black instructors in CTD. But when we got to the military training in basic and advanced and P-40s, they were all the white instructors. And there were some instructors that wanted you to make it, and they told you so. In fact, a couple of my instructors told me that, but then there was a couple that told me they didn't particularly think I could, should, and was going to help me not going to help me learn how to fly. They specifically let me know that they didn't particularly appreciate us horning in on their vaulted activities.
As you look back, as you reflect back on all of that, was that all helpful to you?
Oh, sure. It developed an attitude that I'm going to make it. And I wanted to fly. My grandkids ask me from time to time, Grandpa, with all the crap that you had to go through, why did you stay in? Well, I wanted to fly. The airlines out here at the time were not offering anything for black pilots. It was only subsequent to Korea and very close to Vietnam era that we were able to get into the airline industry to fly. And I loved military flying. Of course, as I got older, the military told me I had to slow down. I was, they wanted some younger folks,
Okay. Would you remember approximately how many classes of African American cadets graduated and became pilots?
I don't know how many classes, but I can tell you 992 of us finished. Now that's
in
pilots.
total.
That's just pilots.
Okay.
We had a total participation of in excess of 15,000. Now that's all aspects of the activity. That includes bombardiers, navigators, maintenance, crew chiefs, armament men, communication, radio maintenance people, doctors, lawyers, the whole bit. So when we say Tuskegee Airmen, we also talk about those participants. As opposed to, now the pilots, yeah, we were the ultimate, or the penultimate. We finally made it to the top.
Right.
But without the crew chiefs, without the armament man, you know.
Okay. That helps to bring things in perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's almost popular culture. Everyone, we've seen the story of the Tuskegee Airmen on television, on HBO, and one of the scenes in that film was about all the public criticisms about African Americans and having a desire to want to fly and learn how to fly, and the fact that there was some resistance initially about that, and that it was Eleanor Roosevelt who was daring enough to want to resist the resistors and have some black troops fly her. And I was wondering if you could talk about your impressions of that, if you remember it, and also was that good for you?
Well, let's back up a little bit. At the time when President Roosevelt, in Title 18, which established the program, congressional entitlement, there were 6 schools, black schools, who were under, well, first they mandate that it had to be at a black school or a black community. Therefore, there were 6 schools, of which Tuskegee was one of the 6 schools under consideration. Mrs. Roosevelt was part of the review package that was looking at these various schools. And she happened to come down to Tuskegee, and she ran into Chief Anderson. And she said, and now the story goes, she asked him to take her up. Now, you've seen the picture of her in the back seat of a Piper J3 Cub. And he took her around. Now, when she asked, the Secret Service went ape. You know that. They couldn't handle it. And they purportedly called President Roosevelt, and he said to her, to the Secret Service troops, if Eleanor wants to, Eleanor will. Now, she took the flight. We were proud and glad for it happening. And based upon that, she helped make a decision to locate the program at Tuskegee. There were other circumstances surrounding the flying area. It was clear. We wouldn't have any problems because of the area, not too many airlines. At the time, there wasn't any flying fields around there of importance. Also, the fact that there was an institute there which could be used as the basis for outside training, like some of us who didn't, at the time the program required 2 years of college. Initially the program said 4 years, later 2 years of college. Later, with the CTD, they give you the training to give you the equivalence for an entry level of having 2 years college. So she was instrumental in getting that started. Without her input and her support, along with Judge Hasty, the program might not have ever started. And we started off as an experiment, which I'm sure that we're proud of the fact that we proved it as being a possible thing. Without our help, I don't think it would have happened.
Excellent. I did some preliminary research reading about the Tuskegee Airmen, and discovered that the fighters squadron was ready to enter the war by the end of 1942. However, they were told that they needed additional training, and which was not a requirement of many of the white cadets. And I was just wondering, was that a good thing?
Well, the real truth is that nobody wanted us. Therefore, they had to find a reason not to allow us. One of the reasons they said is we needed a lieutenant colonel and above to be a commander of the unit. Well, that's how Captain Davis became Major Davis, who became Lieutenant Colonel Davis. Once they determined, because we had 40 to 50 pilots floating around, they didn't have nothing for them to do, to get them into an active unit, they had to have a commander, and he was chosen. And the real reason, again, was that nobody wanted to accept us. Of course, we were sent to North Africa, and we supported. And the stories that you hear, in fact, my squadron commander when I joined the outfit was William Campbell. He flew the first black combat mission in the world. He flew it on my birthday, the 2nd of June, 1943. He flew the first combat mission. And unbeknownst to the rest of the world, we did start flying then. And I'm pleased to say that he tells me, reminds me this regularly, that he flew the first combat mission. Yes, nobody wanted us. In fact, a couple of colonels who I won't mention specifically wrote articles criticizing our activities and our ability to fight and fly. Colonel then Benjamin O. Davis came back to the States, and in briefing to General Marshall and, of course, President Truman, it was determined after a 6-month study that we flew as well as other P-40 units, and we did as well as other P-40 units. So the disparity that was presented was primarily from a biased statement.
Right. Very good. I want to make sure that we get through some of this, because I also want to focus on your activities over the past 20-something years while you've been here in Nebraska, which I think is very interesting. In the late 80s, I had the opportunity to interview former Detroit Mayor Coleman Alexander Young, and got his story about some of the experiences that he encountered and some of the other Tuskegee Airmen. And he told me about the kind of stories about racism and discrimination in the military. He told me about African-American officers who were denied entry into the all-white officers clubs that were set up, and how he was instrumental, as well as some other men, I think it was about 100, he said,
101.
that were instrumental in staging a protest against this kind of practice. And I was wondering if you remembered it, and if you could share some other examples of discrimination against the officers.
Okay, that incident took place in April of 1945. I was overseas at the time, and of course the war was still going on. We found out about it 2 months later, that the bomber drivers, as we called them, bomber pilots and navigators, were not allowed in a club. Now this was almost a repeated. It happened to us at Godman. It happened to us at Walterboro. There was a white club, then there was a black club. At Walterboro, we were told to stay out of the white club, which forced us to go to places like Charleston, because there wasn't, their club was bricks, structures. Ours was a prefab hut, so to speak, with all paper covering and bar. That's about it. There was nothing there. We would go into town. We would go to the USOs. We only had one place to go, black USO. We couldn't go to the white USO. If we did, we had to stand out outside. For instance, one time I was in Charleston. I needed to make a phone call, and I went to the white USO. I was thrown out of it. I was not allowed, and I was told that you know better. Well, I didn't know better. It said USO. I felt, well, I could use it, and the purpose of USO is to provide support for our military, black as others. So you got yours. Well, that's hard. That's hard to accept. Okay. Now a USO is maintained by a civilian adjunct to the military, but still, again, it was for us, I thought. When this took place in the States with the black bomber pilots, we know of them. We knew them. We knew what they went through. Okay. We had our own experiences. As a matter of fact, back at Tuskegee, there was a sheriff down there who wouldn't allow our MPs to carry guns. Any other base that could carry guns, but according to this sheriff, local sheriff, he would not authorize or allow our MPs to carry weapons. They could carry nightsticks. Except one incident happened is that one of our troops went AWOL. He was caught in Chicago. Naturally, an MP in Chicago was bringing him down to Tuskegee, and he had a weapon. Well, this sheriff took this black MP and threw him in jail because he had violated his no arms dictate. Well, our base commander, Colonel Parrish, said, I'll not stand for that. He went and got his MPs, got 20 of them, put them all on the arms, went down and rescued this kid out of the jail. Now, you won't hear about that. They don't write about this, but this is what Colonel Parrish did for us.
Interesting.
Okay.
Tell me about the P-47 Thunderbolts, or JAGs as they were called.
The Jug,
Yeah.
I loved it. It was good. As a matter of fact, it was the best close support airplane I ever flew. Close to the ground, it was solid as a rock. It had a titanium bathtub that protected the pilot. It had 8 guns. I was flying it one day, and we were at a target, and I shot at a truck. I knocked the cab off the truck. In other words, the impact of my bullets hit it at the property and just knocked the top cab off. To me, that was the best thing. And when I pulled it up off the deck, I could see streamers off my tips. From a pilot standpoint, that's the best bird I could think. It wasn't as fast as the P-51, but as far as pilot support was concerned, and when we got back from overseas, we chose to keep the P-47 because its ability to survive. Okay, that was the primary item. It was a pilot survival, pilot comfort. Some birds in Italy, some birds we didn't fly it over there, but some birds I didn't fly it over there. But some birds came back after being hit by enemy flak, knocking out 2 of the jugs. The prop may vibrate, but the bird came on back. It brought the pilot back. That's the stories that I loved it. I loved the airplane.
Okay. Reports suggest that at least 66 Tuskegee Airmen were killed in action, and that an additional 32 of them were captured and became prisoners of war. However, after Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, and Japan surrendered on August 14th, and the war ended, many of the remaining Tuskegee Airmen, who were heroes to many of us here in the States, they came home to a country that was still intent on keeping them and their people segregated. How did you feel then, knowing this, and how do you feel now about it?
Then I was upset because I'd spent a little time prior to coming home in France, in northern Italy. I was accepted, no problems, enjoyed life, worked with, went to some social activities, and I was generally accepted by the populace there. Come back to the States, I was told, for instance, when I got at Camp Patrick Henry, it was where we were received coming back from overseas. I was told that you will only go to this place, this location. You can't go here, you can't go there. This irritated me. I was given the responsibility to bring, because I was an officer, we were going to Jefferson Barracks for separation or going on leave. I was responsible for a whole train load, meaning 4 cars, of guys. I had all their records. Guys that were going to Jefferson Barracks for this processing. My problem was I accepted the responsibility, but I had to endure their insults for this 2.5-day trip from Camp Patrick Henry to Jefferson Barracks. And I had a 45 on me, and my problem is I had problems with it. Because a couple of comments I just didn't want to take. But I did it because I was a military man. I accepted it, and I did my job. But I'm telling you right now, I did not like the trip. The words, the categories, the statements, the questions, and the commentary.
As you reflect back on that, how do you negotiate and think about it today? Yeah.
It's history.
Okay.
History. I want to make sure that my grandkids can enjoy their life knowing that my contemporaries participated at a level to make sure that they can have the benefits of whatever the future's here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking.
One last question about this, very minor but significant. It was a contradiction, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true. True. Wave the flag, but still kick you in the butt, that type of attitude. Especially in certain states. Oklahoma was classic.
Right. Heard a lot of stories about Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, that's another series. I can
Right.
talk about that.
July 6, 1948 was a very important time when President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, which called for equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed forces, regardless of race. After the war, some Tuskegee Airmen continued to serve in the military. And my question to you is, given your experience in the military, was it a good thing for Truman to sign this executive order? And has the military's record improved since then?
One, we're proud of it because he used, as part of his decision, in response to the decision, our performance as the basis, and along with there's a black tank outfit in Italy, with the 92nd Infantry Division, along with the 332nd Fighter Group's activity as a basis for his decision. Title 18, we were very impressed with its implementation of this order, 9981. Now, it didn't take place initially, right away. It took a while. This was in 48. It really didn't get enforced or in place or improved or started to sometime in 50. Because I got recalled in 1950 for the Korean War, and that's when I ran into the problem of questioning my abilities. For I was supposed to go to Willie Air Force Base, check out an F-84, which is a fighter bomber, and end up in the 51st fighter bomber, which, by the way, General Davis later in life took over. But when they found out I was black, they didn't want me. They sent me to comm school. So the military's record at that time was dismal, but it has improved, in fact, considerable. Okay. Looking at the locations and the positions and the respect that minorities have received based upon their performance, I'm proud of it.
Excellent, excellent. Very glad to hear that. Captain Benjamin Davis, who you've mentioned, Jr., eventually rose to the rank of a 4-star general. And in 1998, President Bill Clinton bestowed on him this honor. And he noted that he is a hero of war, a leader in peace, and a pioneer for freedom, opportunity, and basic human dignity. There were approximately 24 Tuskegee Airmen who attended this presidential event. And my question, or questions, were you one of them? And two, what were your impressions of this historic moment?
I was not one of them, but I was proud. Like it was long overdue. I felt that we call him affectionately the old man, we. And it's something that we revere because we revere him. We felt that he was justly overdue, definitely. Was the caliber and type of man who could perform. And there's a picture, and I don't have it, I should have it, showing him and his classmates, in which one of them was Ridgway. This is cadet classmate, standing, shaking his hand, and we call that historic. They finally recognized the man and his capabilities. These guys who, at the time when he was a cadet, wouldn't accept him. So in my view, he stood above them. We carried him, we loved him, okay?
Very good. Well, you not only had a very impressive career as a military man, but in civilian life as well. I believe you came to Omaha at approximately 1962-ish?
1963.
63. And you were involved with Omaha-based poverty program, Greater Omaha Community Action.
That's right.
And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and in what ways had your military training and your earlier upbringing in your community in St. Louis, Missouri, in what ways had these earlier transitional periods in your life influenced your later civilian activities?
Well, when I came here, I was contacted by a friend of mine who worked for the agency, Greater Omaha Community Action. He says, Chuck, he says, we need somebody here to write some procedural manuals. And I said, okay, I was considering just passing through Omaha at the time, and he said, you come in and says, we'll give you a temporary job. So I sat down and I wrote manuals on administration, communications, supply, all those mandatory items required by federal dollars, and inspection in those items. Well, it turned out that they gave me the job as the vice or deputy commander or deputy chief of the organization. And I said, okay. Well, it just so happened the executive director left. Well, as an ex-military man, the second in command, I have the responsibility. I didn't have the responsibility till the day he left. And all of a sudden, my military training came into being. You know, I had to assume management and also policy making and also personnel direction and placement and all those things that I had learned through the military and 28 years of military life came into being, okay? And then meeting inspections, which was at the time something new for this organization, and became interesting. You know, I said, hey, this is going to be fun. It wasn't, though. It wasn't. And learning, one of the things that the military didn't teach me is dealing with politics. And that's something which became the outgrowth of this total experience, was the understanding of politics. What is politics? Why is politics? Why is it necessary? And how to move among friends, how to move among enemies. It was quite an experience. And of course, at the same time, the biggest thing, we were helping people. You know, my development was all right, I enjoyed it, but helping people. But then there's certain sinkholes you get into, I'll kid you not, dealing with certain aspects of federal management that I didn't want to do it again. And after a while, it became tried, and I had to ease out of it. But working with the people was great. Looking at the low-income areas of the community and finding out what we could do, listen to their voices, trying to implement a program to satisfy their needs. And the primary interest is the kids, okay? And that's where we tried to stress our activities and supported kids of all ages. And those who hadn't had a chance, and I saw a lot of folks who hadn't had a chance just to learn, It was a fulfilling area, and I enjoyed a lot of it. But still, again, it was painful at times.
Were there many practices of discrimination that you witnessed or that you encountered when you arrived in Nebraska?
Oh, yeah. When I came in 1963, I couldn't buy a house in certain areas of the community. And I was upset. Now here I spent 3 wars and, you know, fighting 3 wars in this country, and I couldn't buy a house in certain areas of this community or in Lincoln, okay? And there were certain groups of people that if you presented something, you had to check out, did you check with Yo-Yo here? Or did you check with Brown here? And my question is to myself, why do I have to check with him? Or why do I have to check with him? This is the passage you had to go through in order to get your concern and story told. So this was constraints.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Were there constraints in your capacity as the manager and director of the program?
Oh, yeah. There were federal constraints. There were local policies. And then the board itself, in developing their policies, I had to apply. These were understandable. I could understand and live with those, okay? But it's the other, and then the other thing, the bad side of it. The blind side. You get caught blindsided, which means you didn't have your legs, you didn't have communication legs set up to the right channels. Okay. Those things hurt.
Very good. We're running out of time, but I do have at least 2 more sets of questions that I want to be sure to get to.
Talk too much?
No, you're doing great. when did it begin, and for how long have you been active with the Davis chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen in Omaha? And approximately how many members do you have, and what kinds of projects does the organization sponsor?
One, it was established in 1988. Okay, I've been associated with it from the day of inception. I know the originators, and I was part of the original chapter. Our mission, right now, I think we have something like 80 members. Bob Rose, who is our current president, chapter president, is doing a heck of a job, outstanding job, performing. Well, our primary concern is at youth. First, our history, because we were considered the best kept secret of World War II. So we want to, and we haven't found ourselves in the history books, so we make sure that history recognizes that we did exist and that we did perform a service in support of this country. Number two, what we do, we're primarily concerned with kids. We want to make sure that they are available and that they know that there are available avenues for their education and support, especially in the technical areas, or in those areas where minority kids are weak. Communications, electronics, mathematics. Those areas that are necessary in the future. Computers, techniques that the average kid shouldn't be knowing. For instance, my grandkids now can program my computers better than I can, which is interesting. At the same time, I'm glad that they can, because history is bypassing. Like, for instance, I read the other day that DVD is overtaking VCR tapes. They go into the, and I'm saying, boy, my life is really moving. Okay?
Okay. Very interesting. And that's even more interesting considering the fact that you have expertise as a communications electronics staff officer with the military.
That's true.
Nearly how many? 20-something odd years?
Yeah.
Very impressive. What kinds of things did you do in that capacity?
Well, for instance, during Vietnam, we ran all the communications in support of SAC, Strategic Air Command, which included, of other things, air-ground communications for instance, we had the single management for tankers. We refueled all aircraft in the air. So therefore, we had to have a communications network to support these tanker operations. I was responsible for that in the Pacific. I enjoyed that. I had 409 people running the teletype communication between various units. Okay.
Interesting.
And then electronic communication between various units.
Right.
Protection and encryption and protection of it, and deliverance. Okay.
Very good. Excellent.
Okay.
I wish I could expound on that. I do have some follow-up, but we don't have time. But we have time for this other question here, which relates to your second reason why this organization is so important. And former president of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated, Roger C. Terry, describes the goals of the organization in these terms: to let our children and our children's children know that we did conquer the art of our flying, and that we were able to do things that the leaders of the U.S. Armed Forces said we couldn't do. They said at the beginning of this World War II that African Americans couldn't fly. We proved we could sail. We triumphed over the odds, and we went to tell our youngsters. We want to tell our youngsters to prepare themselves and to use their God-given talents, not only to fly airplanes, but also to become doctors, lawyers, or rock singers if they want to, but not to let anyone tell them that they can't. The closing question for you, sir, is what would you say differently to future generations that Mr. Terry did not say?
Mr. Terry, I know Roger. He used to be our president nationally for a long while. He's covered it completely, because I myself believe exactly what he says. I may not be here, but I want to make sure my grandkids, as well as other people's grandkids, take advantage of what's available, all right? And I applaud him for his commentary. Definitely needed.
I thought it was profound.
It is.
I had to include that.
Knowing that Terry was one of the 101 people who, in the incident, he was the only one court-martialed. And it took a 4-star general to remove that from his file and record. We applauded that.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Lang, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Sir.
I've really enjoyed the interviews and your questions, the answers to. Thank you.